Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast and we are day 29. Not in the Big Brother house. We are in the world of Tottenham Hotspur for yet another episode of a soap drama that is ongoing, that is on a roller coaster that takes you wherever you need to go. If you're with us for the very first time, you can find us on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're across all major audio platforms. We're of course on X. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook too. I'm not joined by just one. I'm joined by two of our favourite returning guests to Last Word on Spurs. And I've got to say, it's been a really, really difficult, hard, frustrating, get the buzzwords out of there, period to be a Tottenham fan right now. And it's actually quite sad where we're at that. We are day 29, day 30 for listeners and audio into the transfer window. And I'm happy about something. Not because Tottenham signed a player. We've got one of our favourite journalists back on. And I've got, look, I think it's fair to say the dream team is back for one night only in the house. Before I bring in this wonderful journalist, I'm delighted to have back alongside me for one night only. He will tell you, listen, the wonderful Matty Hayes returns alongside me. Matt, how have I got you on here? What am I thinking of? How have I done this? How are you, mate? So lovely to see you. And send you loads of love.
It's so lovely. So lovely to be back, Ricky. When you dangle the carrot of a show with Ben Jacobs in front of anyone, I think it's difficult to say no to that. So I'm really excited to be back on, but with you and to talk Spurs again. It's been a while since I've had a conversation on camera solely about Spurs and kind of been able to go through the therapy that is needed for what our club has become at the moment. But I'm looking forward to a night of therapy and education.
I've got to say, just for our listeners and audio, you can write a caption in your little title for those that come onto the show on the platform we do it on. And Matt's caption is it legal to sign a forward ? I mean, I might go to say, is it legal to sign an outfield player of day 29, day 13, this transfer window where we are? Look, let's bring a man in that's going to tell us all where we are on Tottenham. I'm not sure all of us might want to hear where we are, but my God, whenever he comes on, it's an education. It's always fun. It's always entertaining. We're joined by the wonderful broadcaster, presenter, journalist, one of the busiest men you will find during summer, January transfer windows. That always finds the time for us, and that's why we love him so much. We're joined by the superb Ben Jacobs back on our screen. Ben, thank you so much. How are you? Lovely to see you.
No, thank you. Great to be back. Keep up the good work. I always enjoy coming on. And there is a danger, given what time we're starting, that we will know by the end of this show if Spurs are going to sign anybody, because I cannot promise that I will finish before February the 3rd when the window shuts, given how in-depth these shows tend to be.
Ben, you know we love you. I mean, I think Matt's just returned because it's one of the most effortless shows there is on Last Word on Spurs. We just put our feet up and listen to you for an hour and a bit. So it is one of the most effortless shows we do. We always love having you on. You're an absolute superstar. Look, so much to get through during this edition of Last Word on Spurs and where Tottenham are during this January transfer window. As I mentioned, day 29, day 30 for our listeners on audio. Tottenham still yet to sign an outfield player. Despite the cries from Ange Postecoglou, the squad needs help. He's made it very, very clear that we've been playing with fire. How much fire are Tottenham playing with in these next few days? If we do not get business done, let's hope things are in motion and Ben will fill us in on more. But look, let's start where we are, Ben, if we can, with the manager, Ange Postecoglou, because as you are acutely aware, I think it's fair to say that Ange, for many out there, may be a small part of a problem. There's some that are still very much behind Ange Postecoglou and still feel he's the right man for the job. But it has been a week in which it has really kind of shown a light on the ownership of the football club and the frustration amongst a lot of the fan base that there is now time for a change. 24 years, 16 managers, 1 trophy. And as we understand at the moment, that will come on to the owners shortly. But with regards to Ange Postecoglou, it does appear Tottenham are sticking by their man. And we're led to believe that amid the injury crisis Tottenham find themselves in right now, they are trying to sign a forward in these final days of the transfer window, even if that should have happened a long, long time ago. And there are indications that Postecoglou is likely to be given till at least the Carabao Cup second leg against Liverpool to try and turn around the form. However, there are suggestions that if there is a dramatic downturn in the games against Elfsborg, respectively, for our listeners on audio tonight, and Brentford at the weekend, that could also change. So what do you understand to be the present situation on Ange Postecoglou's future at Tottenham?
Yeah, I think you summed it up very nicely. It's essentially backing for now, but internal pressure, and that's offset somewhat by mitigating circumstances, because if you make your kind of best 11 from the outfield players that are injured, well, and Vicario as well, it's stronger than the 11 that Ange Postecoglou can field at the moment. And it's not just about that lack of first teamers, if you like. It's also the fact that a player like Archie Gray, for example, is having to basically play everywhere, and it's putting a lot of pressure on a young new signing and a makeshift back line. But that said, football is a results-driven business. So the beginning of the season, it was long-term project. 10 games in, it was backing until at least the end of the season. Now it's backing, but the sort of timeline has been removed. So it reminds me of Gary O'Neill, where 10 games in, Wolves made a dreadful start. They had a lot of tough fixtures against sides that finished top half last season. And it was constantly, he's backed, eventually leading to the Wolves chair, Jeff Shee, making a statement via a column in a local newspaper saying that O'Neill was safe. And 2 days later, he was sacked. And that, in a nutshell, is football. So I think there is a willingness to make it work with Ange, and therefore other potential candidates are only really being spoken about in succession planning. They want it to work with Ange. They understand why some of Spurs' frailties are down to a season in which I think you could never have predicted this amount of injuries. But there's still that willingness and that need now to, at some point, whether it's now out of necessity or whether it's in the summer, have a kind of end of season review in which they'll look into all of these factors when they've got time. Because at the moment, you can't really go into every little minute detail to understand what exactly has caused this inconsistent, frail Spurs that can go from being gung-ho and thrashing Manchester City to losing to Ipswich and Leicester. And if you look at the injuries, of course, you can just say it's unlucky, but you can also try and understand, is any of it down to the same high intensity training? Is any of it on the football department? Or is it completely out of Ange's control? And I'm not sure that they have all of the answers to that right now. So short answer, backing for now, internal pressure. Long answer, lot of mitigating circumstances, which probably will buy Postecoglou time. They are going to try, as you say, and give him some kind of attack-minded player in the final few days of the window. And then absolutely, I agree with you. I think the next 2 or 3 games, trying to get to Wembley Stadium, prove he can win something in his second season, feel very important. So the idea is to keep it going with Ange, end of season review, and only a consistently poor string of results that some Spurs fans will say have already happened will lead to anything being reconsidered mid-season.
I want to throw some stats at you, Ben. Tottenham are on track to finish the lowest of the big 6 clubs for the first time since 2007, 2008. And funnily enough, still haven't got as many points as we did in the first 10 games of last season in the opening 23 games of this season, 26 compared to 24. Or points per game in the Premier League this season is at 1.04, which is the lowest in any campaign for the club in 75 years. We are the 3rd highest scorers in the league behind Arsenal and Liverpool, yet we've won just 1 of our last 11 games, picking up 1 point in the last 7, which, even when I say it out loud, is actually difficult to process, is a true statistic for Tottenham. We're closer to the relegation zone than we are to the top half of the table. And our loss rate for the season has been 56.5%. Like I said, gone 7 matches without a win, 6 defeats in there. We've lost 2 Premier League games against teams in awful runs of form. It's 1 win in 12 Premier League games and 1 win in 14 Premier League games. We've 9 wins in the last 9 months and 13 defeats in 23 league games. I'm not going to ask you to rattle those back off to me. But do you feel there is a genuine belief within the club that Ange can actually turn this around?
Well, I mean, you missed out the most astonishing one, which is it's first time since 1912 that Tottenham have lost to a team with 7 straight defeats in the league.
We left that one out because you're coming on, Ben.
You've got to give me something to cling to statistically.
Sorry.
I mean, I'm trying not to smile. You may note if you're eagle-eyed behind me is Claudio Ranieri, and I hold my hands up. It's on my Twitter bio. I'm a Leicester fan, but I take no glee, honestly, in Tottenham's plight because there's so much potential there. They've laid the foundations for a new project. They've had a lot of change behind the scenes. There's a lot of clouds almost around who is the decision maker. Fabio Paratici as a consultant, then a whole new team, including someone, for example, like Scott Munn, Ange Postecoglou having a fair amount of say, he pushing for players that can play in more than one position with versatility, pace, high intensity, all being important. And, sometimes in building a new project, and I think Chelsea had this as well in the first year under Clearlake Bowley, you can end up just moving too fast. And not all good change is necessarily apparent instantly. So sometimes it looks like you've made an error, a signing's come, only depth, not somebody that can really impact the starting 11, but you might need to wait 1 or 2 seasons. I think, for example, how critical people were of Joe Linton when he first joined Newcastle, and then Eddie Howe came in and he was one of the best midfielders in the Premier League. So right now I kind of look at the younger part of Spurs project, whether that's Mikey Moore or Archie Gray or Lucas Bergvall, and I think, wow, these are all going to be elite players. Then you kind of think a fit Dominic Solanke, if he can get his Bournemouth form, should be in a very clear position where he can make up some of the shortfall left by Harry Kane. And then Son, for whatever reason, maybe it's age, maybe it was the uncertainty over the contractual situation, hasn't quite performed. But if you just lay out the pieces, you think this is still a quality Spurs team. And if you add the players that are injured, you think they've got a lot for the now, a lot for the future, and a fair amount of depth. The back line, when fit, I think, is up there with the rivals in red, who I won't insult you by naming on this podcast, but I think when you line up the 4 fit plus Vicario, one of the best back lines there is in the Premier League. And you know what? I get the stats that you mentioned, Matt, but there was maybe 15 games in the season, something around that mark, and Spurs basically had the best attack and the best defense in the Premier League, and they're about 9th in the table. So this, I think, is why it's so hard to get heads around where the Spurs project is. Because if you look at it now, you say, forgetting Ange Postecoglou for a moment, you just need to strengthen in areas where they've been screaming to add. Timo Werner's probably not going to stay. There's room for another goal scorer because of the form of Son, or at least somebody's players like an advanced 8 or a 10, because even James Maddison hasn't got going. And that partnership, when you flashed up the table before, that showed Spurs top, was really all about Maddison and Son and keeping clean sheets. So if the Maddison-Son partnership goes, then immediately in that first table on the left there, it's very likely that Spurs would be more like 6th or 7th. Whereas now it's the opposite. You add a few goals from a fit Solanke or Maddison coming back into the team, you add Van de Ven and Romero, and they wouldn't be too far off. So I don't think there's as big a gap as that kind of side-by-side tables suggest. But I also think that there has to be an understanding that it's not just buy, the market will fix all. Because the most damning thing, I think, still against Tottenham is not the injuries, the bad luck, who they need in the market. It's just the fact they're chucking away points they should have taken this season. You must follow up, however you do it, an incredible win at Man City with victory over Ipswich. You must build on Hoffenheim by beating Leicester. And then you think 1-0 up against Leicester, 2-0 up against Chelsea. How many times can they consistently get their noses in front, do all the hard work, and then find a way to undo it all? And I think that's the part that at some point now or the summer, they're going to have to understand. Is that down to Ange? Is that down to the players? Is that down to the culture? Because they start games pretty well. They get leads. They're in a position where the points are in their hands, and then they drop them more often than not.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can't disagree with what you're saying there, Ben. I mean, I think it has been a really frustrating season, most certainly as fans, although we do have those cup competitions that are still there for Tottenham, which Ange keeps alluding to in his recent press conferences. And obviously we're building up on the eve of the Elfsborg game, which again for Tottenham it's an opportunity to make sure they do finish in those automatic qualifying places in the Europa League. We have heard differing reports, it's fair to say, Ben, over the course of the last week or so. And this is probably natural when a manager is under pressure, that some players are totally bought in, some players are maybe less so brought into the project overall. It wouldn't be the first time that we would have seen these reports or heard these reports. These are the similar reports that follow a lot of different Tottenham squads, whether it's under Mourinho, Conte, Nuno Espirito Santo, Maurizio Pochettino. I think it's fair to say that I presume at this stage, Ben, that would be fairly normal that a manager will obviously be 100% having some that are still 100% bought in, and naturally players that maybe aren't as much inclined by the way in which they're playing or they're training or they're maybe non-event of playing, you will get a little bit of separation in the camp. Is that fair with any kind of club and where they find themselves in with this current form, Ben?
Yeah, and also you get players that change their perspective. Like I remember interviewing Dejan Kulusevski when Ange first joined, and he basically said when things were rosy, he's a very different kind of manager. There's an aloofness between him and the squad. And he liked that because he felt there was this authority, there was this frankness, there was this honesty. But then if results turn, sometimes the players want the manager to adapt. And I think Ten Hag was guilty of that at Manchester United, not understanding that you can't just manage with one persona, because when things go right, you get away with it. When things go wrong, you have to be able to adapt. And Claudio Ranieri at Leicester, season that we won the Premier League, incredible. Season after, some of the same players started to doubt him because he went back to being the tinker man, and the eccentricity and the passion and the rigid philosophical viewpoint of formation and selection, all with a bit more depth in the squad, kind of became more debated and disputed. And it proved to be the beginning of the end for Ranieri, when you would have said the day after you've won the Premier League, he's unsackable. You can give the guy a life contract at Leicester. So my sense is that the players like Ange, they find him refreshing. They enjoy the training. They like the style. But it's very apparent that a starting 11 can execute that. And through a mixture of potentially lack of depth and also youth and still learning, once they lose a part of the spine, the kind of makeshift 11, if you like, and we have to call it that because there's so many players out, or the secondary 11, or the for the future 11, whatever way you want to look at it, because there's players getting minutes or in different positions who wouldn't normally expect to be this involved or integral in their development, and Gray is one, for example. So at that point, you need your manager to give you clarity, or you need your manager to protect you, or you need your manager to adapt and say, maybe we need to do a different system. Maybe we need to be a little bit less intense. Maybe we need to be not gung-ho. Maybe if we get 1-0 up, we back ourselves defensively, especially when Van der Ven and Romero come back. And I don't think we've seen any of that. So it's normal, therefore, that eventually the players start looking around, and at a big club in a big squad, there can always be a scenario in football where the dressing room feel they're just going to outlast the manager. I don't think we're there with Spurs and Ange yet. It feels like manager and players are pulling in the same direction. The bigger question is hierarchy and football department. Are they also pulling in the same direction? And I think the jury's a bit more out on the latter.
That brings us nicely on to our next question, Ben, because there was a football finance expert, Stephen Borson, on TalkSport, and he claims that Tottenham could splash out £180 million and still not break financial regulations, which I think has been kind of publicly a big factor in a lot of Tottenham's business decisions recently. And he says that our lack of transfer activity is, quote, a choice, because Daniel Levy prefers to run a very tight ship, and he calls it probably the tightest ship in the Football Money League. There was no doubt in that game on Sunday that we heard the loudest chants we've heard yet within the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium about the discontent around Daniel Levy's position as chairman, and thousands of supporters getting involved. But we've also seen some media coverage, some global media coverage of that in the days that have followed. How much responsibility do you feel is on the hierarchy for where the club currently finds itself this season?
All of it, because you've gone through so many different managers that the only consistency in the entire football club is Daniel Levy. And that's not to say Daniel Levy's to blame, but what it is to say is that Daniel Levy is policing the entire strategy. So if it's going well, he's going to get credit. And if it's not going as well, he's going to get criticism regarding what they can and can't spend. I think it's more important to be looking at net spend than specific numbers, because say Richarlison got sold somewhere for between 40 and 60 million, then you're going to invest some of that money. And if you buy somebody at 50, 60 million, your net spend is zero. So this idea of the budget is 180 million, that's not really how most football clubs think. They're looking at their projection, and Tottenham's, like many clubs, will be very conservative. So the football aim will be high, but your chief financial officer always places a very pessimistic expectation. And that's not because of where Spurs are. Any club that didn't get Champions League last season is probably budgeting financially for 10th place, regardless of whether or not the football department feels they're going to qualify for Europe. I remember doing an on-record interview with Paul Barber, the Brighton CEO, straight after they qualified for Europe. And he said, even next season, like last season, we'll be planning for 12th financially. And that's not unambitious. That's conservative and sensible, due to the fact that if you get better than that, you free up more budget. And at the same time, it doesn't affect your clear football goal to finish much higher than that. But what you can't do in the world of finance is say, let's just budget for 4th, even if we think we might be 5th, 6th, 7th, because then you're putting that number on your spreadsheet. And if you fall beneath that, you've got to adapt. So I don't think there's a set number. I think now there's just urgency. So the key question is effectively, will Daniel Levy change his approach in the market? Because he's the one ultimately signing the checks. And it is a bit surprising, even in a seller's market, that Tottenham, like other clubs, I think we have to say, it's not only Spurs. You can mention, like I said before, the A word, or alternatively Manchester United, even Chelsea. They're all waiting until right at the end of the window. Now, the reason clubs do that is because January is a seller's market. And I think, as we said on the last show that I was on, for 3 weeks in the market, if you want to buy, sometimes you just have to play a waiting game, because you might only get the deal you're looking for in the final days of the window. But that's only if you're absolutely insistent that you're only going to do a deal if it is a value. Whereas you can make an argument, if you need someone that urgently, just go and overpay a little bit if the money is there. And there's enough leeway for Spurs as far as PSR is concerned for 2024, 2025. So spend that extra, even if it's 10, 15 million. I'll give you an example. Newcastle United, when PIF came in, looked like they were going to go down at the midway point of the season. And believe it or not, one of their big signings to save them was Chris Wood from Burnley. And if you look at all of the PIF spend, even up to now, probably the only player they've really, in inverted commas, overpaid for, and that's no disrespect to Chris Wood, what a season he's having at Nottingham Forest. I mean, overpaid in relation to what the market felt the player was worth at that time. Newcastle probably paid 10, 12 million more than most would have contemplated. But they said, that is just worth it because we think this guy's going to score enough goals to keep us up. So Spurs are in a situation where a week in the window, it's blindingly obvious that you need a centre-back and you need a centre-forward. And that's probably before a few injuries like Dom Solanke tweaking his knee. Now, maybe the right targets, if we're being fair to Daniel, were not available. Maybe there just wasn't deals to be had at that stage. But it doesn't appear, talking to sources, apart from Randall Kolo Muani loan, that many formal offers were placed. So they've let the window run, and how many games have been in that window that if they hadn't let the window run, whoever they may bring in terms of outfield players could have influenced those games. So that, I accept, is kind of an outsider's perspective as a journalist. And we got to be fair to any club and say there may be other reasons. They may be saving the bulk of the budget because they feel like there's certain deals they can pull off in the summer. And because they know with certainty there's a strong likelihood they're waiting. The targets may have said no, like Randall Kolo and Morani choosing to go to Juventus. And I think what Spurs do very well is they keep their business silent and discreet. So right now, people are saying we're doing nothing, but it is also because they work very well, much like Liverpool, under the radar. I don't think Tottenham want a scenario where every little move they make in the market is out there. So they may be busier behind the scenes than it appears in the media landscape. But by the same token, we're very late in the window, and it is a big surprise that no outfield players have signed.
Well, let's dive into the specifics of the lack of business in this window. And I think we can start this by even looking at the back line. Cristian Romero and Mickey van de Ven were both injured on the 8th of December in our game against Chelsea, and Ben Davies 3 days beforehand. We went into the window with one fit centre-back, but it's not just there where the problems lie. And, Postecoglou stated that the club was well aware of their situation, that they were doing their utmost to make things happen in this window. But as far as he knows, earlier today in a press conference, nothing is imminent. It's the 29th of January. Our club is in the midst of one of the worst injury crises I have ever seen, and I'm sure a lot of fans have ever seen in Premier League football. And our manager is confirming that there's still nothing imminent. That's 4 weeks of a transfer window, not a single outfield player signed. And I even taking into consideration the difficulties of a January window and the difficulties of attracting players when you're 15th in the Premier League, I think most Spurs fans watching would agree that it's nothing short of a disgrace that these issues haven't been addressed. How surprised are you that we're here with 4 days left in this transfer window and Spurs haven't signed a single outfield player yet?
Yeah, very surprised. I mean, if we go back to the last show I did towards the beginning of the window, I think I predicted 2 or 3. Kinski came in. So that's 2 more outfield players. One is a defender and one is some form of attacker. I think the defender's a little bit harder because there's not that many centre-backs that Tottenham felt were both value and wanted to join. And maybe in the centre-back front, you have slightly more complex circumstances because when everybody is fit, the kind of caliber of centre-back that maybe they feel is available on the market isn't going to want to join Spurs if they feel that as everybody recovers, they're going to get less and less game time. So, for example, Axel Disasi available on a loan. Aston Villa and Wolves are the 2 clubs. I'm not aware that Tottenham contemplated Disasi. I don't think he's necessarily the best fit for Tottenham's kind of style or back line. But that kind of player, you might get a loan and then it takes you through to the end of the season and then you shake hands and you say you've served your purpose. Kevin Danso, another name they looked at, and immediately realized that the asking price is 30 million euros or more. So they walked away. And it would have been perhaps more reassuring to fans to hear this blow by blow. If they made an inquiry, the price was very high, they walked away. But you also don't want a scenario where someone else, in terms of a rival club, is playing it out and all their fan base get excited and then it never happens. And Tottenham are probably sitting there going, well, we're getting criticism because we were not looking at that deal. But we knew all along that it wasn't possible because we did our research. So Wolves are now trying for Danso. They've agreed terms with the player. And guess what? The price is 30 million or more and they don't want to do that deal. So it's kind of ironic sometimes because I know from sources in Spurs, in Liverpool, in Arsenal, there's this big clamour for why are we not negotiating? And then all these names come out in the market and fans will often say, I want them, them and them. Like I saw Evan Ferguson, for example, in the chat right at the beginning of the show. But if you've done your due diligence and you say it's either not possible, the player doesn't want to move, you back off early so you're not wasting your time. Then you watch everyone else scramble and you're probably thinking deep down, we knew we couldn't get that player. But just because it hasn't come out there in the media domain, Spurs get billed as the silent club. So does the red team down the road. But your Chelseas, your Villas are always busy, always spinning multiple plates. Everybody's doing that. It's just some clubs' work gets out easier in the market than others. And credit, like I said before, to Tottenham for keeping some of their business discreet. But let me give you an example on Evan Ferguson. He is available on a loan. Brighton really don't want to sell. So they're only going to loan him if they don't want to sell to a club where they think he's going to be playing regularly. The last thing they want to do is go, okay, go to Spurs because they've got need. Dom Solanke comes back in 6 weeks. Son can lead the line. Richarlison's still there. How often is Evan Ferguson going to play? It's different if they change their mind and say loan with an option or an obligation. Then you think, do I want the player? Is he going to stay fit? And is that option, given that 18 months ago he was an 80, 90 million pound player, valuable enough? Or is it ultimately a lot of money for quite a high risk because he's not in form or scoring goals and he's been injured for the last few weeks? So that's the sort of perspective where, yes, Tottenham would like to look at a player like Ferguson in an ideal world. And of course, they've done their due diligence on him. But if there's no option to buy, it might not be for them. And I'm not going to give too much away on Mathys Tel because I know you like to keep the transfer stuff for a little bit later in the show.
Ben knows the boy. Ben knows the
Tel
trick.
is the most interesting one without speaking specifics because we'll tease it and come on to it later.
Yep.
There's a feeling now that all formulas are on the table. So what was a loan, and again, you say, okay, might help us till the end of the season, but then what if he does well, goes back to Bayern, they're delighted with his minutes, and that's that. Now every formula's on the table: option, obligation, permanent transfer, straight loan. And that's why, including Spurs, there's such a high volume of suitors circling, because they're going, well, hang on a minute, there's the deal we want there to be had. And that's what tends to happen in the final hours of the window. Day one of the window, Tel not for sale. Week one of the window, Tel says, I want to stay at Bayern Munich. Week three of the window, it's Nkunku going one way, Tel going the other. Nothing comes of it. And everyone goes, okay, so I guess he's just staying at Bayern. Week four of the window, the player says, actually, I want out. I want minutes. I want some solution, temporary or permanent. And Bayern go, yikes, we're running out of time here. And then every suitor comes in and pounces and says, here's all of our different offers. And they try and control the transfer narrative, which they couldn't do in the previous 3 weeks of the window. And that's why you get a mad scramble in the final days of January that we don't see as much in the summer because it's a slower market and there's more time to work with.
Ben, thank you so much. Look, we are going to quickly squeeze in our belated first break of the show for our listeners on audio. We have got nearly over 15,000 of you that are watching us live. Thank you so much, as always, for incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. I'm joined by one night only, Matty Hayes returns to Last Word on Spurs. Matt, thank you so much. Steering a very, very difficult Tottenham ship alongside me, I think it's fair to say. But we're at ease on this ship because we've probably got the best pilot, do you say, trying to drive us through difficult, heavy terrain in the Tottenham stormy waters of the wonderful presenter, broadcaster, journalist, Ben Jacobs, who's blessed us not only once but twice during this transfer window. Massive, massive friend of the show. Our relationship stretches back 5, 6, 7 years. And we've let him on. We delayed it a little bit with Leicester, of course. We couldn't have brought him on a Monday. That would have been hard to stomach. And yes, we did leave out the stat about 1912 or 1972. Forgive us, Ben. We could have thrown that stat in for you. We know how busy it is for you, Ben, so we really, really do appreciate it. I want to say out there, for everyone watching the show live, keep liking, keep subscribing, share this to a wide Spurs audience. I think Ben's been superb for so many clubs during the window of keeping everybody updated on their respective clubs. We implore you, please keep liking, subscribing, share the show to a wide footballing audience out there to get the very, very latest news on Tottenham. And that is what we're going to do next. We're going to try and understand where Spurs are going into these final days of the window, who they want to sign, what are the main targets, and those names that have cropped up in the last 24 hours. We're going to get you an update on every single one of those names right now as terms of where we are. Look, you've mentioned, Ben, that you have been quite surprised that Tottenham haven't done more to date when it comes to the transfer window so far. To stop reminding everybody out there, I'll say it for the last time, we have not yet signed an outfield player during this transfer window, much to the frustration of the Spurs fan base. I think you've said already you expect the club to try and move for a forward and a defender. Are they what you understand to be the priority targets? And if I was to ask you to grade them 1 to 2, is that forward the definitive main number one target Tottenham have to get through the door between now and the end of that window?
Yeah, 100%. I think they're working to try and bring in a forward full stop. The centre-back or some kind of versatile defender is a little bit more open-ended because time may run out. So if it's a perfect end to the window, yeah, 1 forward, 2 defender, but it may be that it's only a forward that comes in at this point. And it is a bit more urgent because, as we've sort of seen in the last 24, 48 hours, there's some positive signs about players starting to come back at the back. The worry is you throw them in too early and then you're in a situation where there's a higher likelihood of an injury recurrence or they're not match fit, and that can affect the results as well. So I still think personally it would be smart to find a kind of experienced depth centre-back who likes the idea of featuring on and off, potentially in Europe, getting maybe, hopefully, to a cup final, but knows that they're not necessarily going to play every single week if everybody gets back to fitness. Because I come back to what I said before, that Spurs back line, when they're all fit, is either the best or one of the top 2, in my opinion, in the entire Premier League. So that's the only challenge with adding a centre-back in particular. If you were to, and again, to stress, I'm only using it as an example because Tottenham haven't made an approach for Axel Disasi. But if you get an Axel Disasi, last thing he's going to want to do is go from Chelsea not playing to the Spurs bench not playing. So loanees are often quite picky and demanding when they move mid-season, because obviously the last thing they want to do is be in a repeat situation from where they feel they've had to leave because they're not getting the same minutes. Whereas with the forward, I think there is a clear opportunity, especially if, like we said at the top of the show, they can play in more than one position. Because although Dominic Solanke, when fit, may start, and Richarlison's got a couple of goals against Everton and Leicester, and Son can lead that line as well. If you kind of get a number 9 that can also play as a false 9 or a 10, or even as a sort of wide forward, particularly on the left-hand side, in the long run, you then have the opportunity to integrate them alongside Dominic Solanke, especially if 1, Son gets less minutes within that triggered extra year, or 2, as expected, Timo Werner's option is not taken. So if they can buy now, escalate summer business and find that Werner replacement or that longer term Son successor or that competition for Solanke, if they can do that now instead of the summer, then I think that makes a lot of sense. Whereas buying or loaning a centre-back now that may be twiddling their thumbs when everybody's fit creates a slightly more challenging squad situation.
And that versatile forward that Tottenham could be looking for is Mathys Tel, with Tottenham, with reports today saying that Tottenham are in talks with the management of the player. Spurs will be prepared to do something important for Tel. That's according to Fabrizio Romano. So we want to try and we want to go big. A bit late. Both a loan and a permanent move are currently still a possibility for Tel. I think, as you mentioned earlier, the formula of the deal is still open for discussion. Tel can play across the front three. He's played left wing and striker for Bayern Munich this season. And the fact that he's still only 19 years of age plays in his favour and Tottenham's favour in terms of what could be a big investment for the club. He's reportedly Tottenham's top target. Can you confirm this is the case?
Yeah, and I think not only that, but they do want either an option or an obligation of permanence. So we know Tottenham are going to be very versatile because with Randall Kolo Muani, they were just looking for a loan and they made an offer. They lost out to Juventus. So obviously in their mind was, can we get somebody temporary and then reassess in the summer? But Tel is different because he, as Chelsea have found, and Manchester United and several other clubs across Europe, that player and profile is somebody that clubs felt maybe there's a window of opportunity in the summer. And now they suddenly realise that he might want to leave Bayern now. So why loan when you can either have the option to buy or an obligation? And this is what might give Spurs a competitive advantage, depending obviously on if the player thinks his preference is to leave Bayern and come back, which was his belief at the start of the window, or now just to leave Bayern because he's not playing under Vincent Kompany. And it feels like in the last month, the player has gone from not even wanting to leave to wanting to stay at Bayern but wanting more minutes to now being completely open to leaving Bayern. So with Chelsea, the interest is long-standing from last summer, but they're going to have to convince Tel that he's going to have a starting place. And there's so much competition in his position at Chelsea. Manchester United only want a straight loan. So if the player decides, that's it, I'm done with Bayern, they're not going to take up an obligation. An option maybe, but that doesn't give the player any security. Whereas I'm told with Tottenham that they would commit to a loan with an obligation, or depending on the finances, a straight purchase. So I think Tottenham are looking at Tel for the long term, not just as a stopgap. And I do think that he's one of the top targets in the final days of the window, and he's available as well. We'll speak about some other names, Yoane Wissa, concrete interest there, but obviously much, much harder because Brentford don't want to sell. And Noah Okafor, which I think Fabrizio Romano revealed first, is another name on the list. We've already covered Evan Ferguson a little bit. Jonathan David wants to wait and be a free agent. He doesn't want to move for a nominal fee now. So I don't expect anything to be sanctioned there. And the reason is because David just says, why not wait? Work out who's got what. Who's got the Champions League? Who's got the ability to pay me the biggest sign-on fee? He can collect offers as a free agent. Whereas when you are potentially moving mid-season, you need your club buy-in. And because you're going to go for a nominal fee, the player will benefit less in terms of the overall package. So David, I think, is just biding his time. Tottenham might revisit that. I think there's a very strong possibility, by the way, that there'll be more than one attacker, perhaps different profiles, maybe one, a more traditional number 9 that, a bit like Xerxes, can drop back and play across the front line. And another, I think, that might be more of a winger wide forward that's predominantly left side. But yeah, in answer to your question, I think that Tel is very high in Tottenham's thinking at the moment.
I think also, just to add on that, Ben, if you don't mind also confirming, I think Tel is a player Tottenham have looked at in the past as well. I think Spurs were linked predominantly with the player at the time, and when Harry Kane did complete that move to Bayern, there was interest from Tottenham with regards to trying to bring Tel to the football club. So I think maybe on that basis, it's good to maybe have that feeling that this is a player that isn't essentially a panic buy or a panic option. This is a player that has been scouted over a several period of time where they've seen him develop. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's a player that I think, as Matt alluded to when he asked you the question, can play across the front three, which gives Tottenham a magnitude of options and would also give the player, you'd feel, a more freedom and flexibility to be on the team and not just limiting to one straight option in terms of one position.
Yeah, I'm not aware actually that there was a direct link between Tel and Kane, mostly just because his favoured position, or predominant one anyway for Bayern, is left winger. So he is a very different kind of player to Harry Kane. And at 19 years of age now, when Tottenham were looking over the summer period, you have to understand that this is still somebody that may need a full season of acclimatization to adapt to the Premier League. He's got all the attributes. He's got intelligent movement off the ball. He can finish. He gets into the pockets of spaces. He likes to cut inside. He works well with a fullback overlapping. He's a kind of decoy winger, as I like to call it, although I don't think that's actually an official term. And what I mean by that is when he has the ball, he's got very fast acceleration over short spaces. And what he does very well is draws players towards him and then waits for somebody on the inside and somebody on the outside. The one on the inside is obviously the kind of player that often gets ahead of you, and then you have the opportunity to do a give and go with, or they might just run into the box and you might chip it in there to them. The one on the outside is your more traditional fullback when the winger comes inside. And what he does really well is draws the defenders, and his ball release is very subtle. So he'll send the eyes one way, pass it the other, do a no-look pass, drop the shoulder, go the other way, use both of the actual overlaps or the inverted player as well as kind of decoys, and go on a 1v1. And I think his decision-making, because he's so fast over short spaces, is very, very strong in that split second. So I'm very impressed with him when he actually has the ball at feet and you go, can you make the right decision? And against Leicester, for example, apart from Pedro Porro, who put in a phenomenal ball for the Richarlison opener, the amount of times that Tottenham had the ball in the centre of the park, Tottenham had the ball wide on the edge of the Leicester area, and the passing was backwards, the passing was negative, or they gave it away with a pass that was too short or a cross that was undercooked. And eventually they got punished for that. Whereas most of the time I watch Tel on the ball, both his passing and his movement is first rate, but he is basically a left winger who can play as a lead striker and is able to switch sides. So I don't think we're really looking at the mould of Harry Kane, but I think the reason why Spurs may be tempted to have an obligation or some kind of buy purchase is simply because you look at that left side. I don't think Werner's going to stay, and they're going to have to work out what the long-term solution for Son is as well.
I think, just if you don't mind me coming one more final point on Tel, I think what many would be intrigued to know is, from your perspective, is it just a case of the quality Bayern have got in the forward areas as to why they would be allowing Tel to go? Because there has been certain narratives out there that maybe he's frustrated by the fact of not being involved in more of a first-team role at Bayern. Many are concerned out there, are we buying someone that might be potentially a bad egg? It's hard maybe for you to comment on that, you know, in your role. But, I mean, predominantly, it is a player that is simply desperate to play football and just isn't getting the game time at Bayern, as far as you understand it.
Yeah, I also think he's too deep at Bayern, and that's because you have players like Elise and Muller that are encouraged to play through the centre. It's very direct. It's fed to Kane. You've got a 4-1-4-1. So someone, for example, like Pavlovic will just feed Kane to feet with his back to goal. It'll go out to Tel and Sane, and it's about feeding Kane. And then Muller and Elise have got a lot of freedom. And because it's like a front line of 4 playing behind Harry Kane, he's immediately in a more old school winger position that you would kind of associate with the 80s, the 90s in what then would have been a 4-4-2 formation. Whereas really, I think Tel is going to thrive when he's given a lot more freedom. That's the first point. And I think some of that is obviously down to Vincent Kompany. And then when you look at systems, he's going to be much better, in my opinion, in like a Tottenham 4-3-3, because again, he's playing in a front line of 3, not behind a lead striker. And that suits his attributes better. Regarding the, in inverted commas, bad egg, as you say, it's not for me to judge footballers, especially teenagers. There's always 2 sides to every story as well. So we have to be fair to young kids and not sort of speculate about what they're like in terms of their mentality. But what I would say is that sometimes when young players want to leave big clubs, it's just because they back themselves. So it doesn't mean they're disruptive or not team orientated. It just means they've got a bit of swagger to them. I think John Duran's the same. He could be playing Champions League football for Aston Villa, but he says, no, I'm just going to go. I'm going to play alongside Ronaldo. I'm going to earn a load of money. I can still come back to Europe at any point because I'm young. Cole Palmer said to Pep Guardiola, I don't want to do things on your timescale. I want to go straight to Chelsea. That was the right decision as well. Maybe in the long run, not this window. James McAtee will be exactly the same. I think James Maddison, when he joined Leicester, was absolutely the same and felt like he could upgrade. And that was proven correct because within about a year, he became one of Leicester's most influential players. So there's countless times when you hear a player's not a fit, and everyone speculates. And like I say, there's always 2 sides, and I don't get dragged into that kind of he said, she said, or politics. But there's so many instances of football, particularly with under 21 players, where it doesn't work out at one club and then they're electric at the next. I think Jadon Sancho's made a very positive start at Chelsea, and there were all manner of stories about him at Manchester United. We hear about Marcus Rashford and somehow not being up to scratch in training, but that's only one perspective. And again, if he makes a move, you would think he'd do very well wherever he goes. So if a player feels a gripe because they're not getting that much game time, or if they just don't suit the style, or if for whatever reason, I'm not specifically talking about Tel, but hypothetically they don't get on with the manager, that can help as well. Because as long as you're happy with their character and their talent, they're going to arrive with a bit of fire in the belly to try and almost prove their old club wrong. And I think that was Cole Palmer and Chelsea, and that probably will be Tel wherever his next destination is.
I want to jump back a second there to the analysis that you gave of the type of player he is. And I want to give a mention to the thousands of Spurs fans who just let out a yelp on public transport in their morning commute, hearing you say that he has a burst of pace and likes to take defenders on 1v1, because that is exactly what we have been lacking in our front line for way too long. But looking at a potential alternative for Mathys Tel, and reports have said that that could be Noah Okafor, that he may have been proposed to Spurs as an alternative, since the competition for Tel, as you've spoken about, is very high. In the last few hours, Tottenham have had indirect contact with Milan. Okafor has 1 goal in 11 matches in Serie A this season. His injury record, a massive concern. He's had 5 hamstring injuries in his career so far, and he's only 24. Is this one that you can see as a realistic option for Tottenham, or are we maybe seeing some games from agents as they look for moves in the last few days of the window?
Could be a bit of games. I mean, Milan are happy to loan with option obligation or at the right price sell. And that number will be between 25 and 30 million euros, to my understanding. And I thought this was going to get done with Leipzig. It may still as well in the next 24, 48 hours. But it's really Leipzig pushing. It's hit a little bit of a roadblock. And that's where I think the window of opportunity has suddenly arisen, because those on the player side are saying, what other options are out there? Who's looking? And it just feels like that kind of window where if you've got a client who can play anywhere across the front line, you could go to Man United, Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea, even potentially Newcastle, given Callum Wilson's fitness, and they all might entertain something. So there may be an element of games here, only in the sense that Leipzig were really the club pushing, and they got it to the point where they thought they had a formula alone with some kind of option. but it's not done yet. It may have hit a snag. It feels like it's dragged on now for a couple of weeks. So Tottenham could consider that kind of profile, but we're certainly not in any advanced stage at the time of recording.
It's interesting because, I mean, this is the nature, as you know, Ben, of the transfer window where you go from one degree to another. I'm sure there'll be many Spurs fans out there that might be excited by Mathys Tel based on that small glimpse you gave us of analysis. Well, you gave us a massive glimpse of analysis, but I think the main takeaway will be pace. Pace is that we're really missing, and having somebody that can run at defenders and terrify them. And I think there will be fans out there that see, as Matt mentioned there, the alternative being Noah Okafor, 1 goal, 11 matches in Serie A, the 5 hamstring injuries, as Matt has alluded to, saying, don't you dare, Tottenham, don't you dare, because there will be a concern that, given the nature of the way we're training at the moment, with no disrespect to Ange, in terms of, when I say that, there seems to be a common theme in terms of the injuries that we're picking up at this present moment in time. And on top of that as well, that goal record is really, really concerning. And I think it comes back to that point, Ben, where Spurs can't afford to panic buy. As much as we need bodies right now, they've got to be the right kind of profile. And I presume that kind of leads me on very nicely. You mentioned Yoane Wissa as being a potential another player Tottenham may look at. Now, Spurs have reportedly registered that interest in the player. Look, he's scored 11 Premier League goals in 19 appearances. He has the ability to play either up front or wide, which again is likely to appeal to Ange Postecoglou. His former actually has seen him linked with a number of Premier League clubs, including, I believe, Nottingham Forest, who I think reportedly did also make a bid so far during this January transfer window. That offer, I believe, was rejected, and B's manager Thomas Frank publicly has stated already this month he's not for sale. On that basis alone, Ben, we know money talks. How realistic can you see there being Wissa to exit Brentford, potentially to Tottenham, if the money is right this month?
I don't think there's much of a chance, unfortunately, on this one. He'd be a great signing. You look at that partnership between Wissa and Mbeumo. They're great friends. They're enjoying playing together. And it's amazing, really, because Brentford are probably 3rd or 4th top goal scorers in the Premier League, and that's without Ivan Toney. But at the moment, I'm told Brentford are firm in their position. They don't have a need to sell. They're not looking ahead to PSR to close the current financial year. So I think Wissa and future will be more of a topic of conversation in the summer. It would take something astronomical. And then even if the money was right, there's no guarantee that the player necessarily wants to move mid-season either. If you go back to their last game when Mbeumo had that retaken penalty against Crystal Palace, Wissa was standing right behind him and he was celebrating before the penalty was even taken. He's enjoying playing for Brentford. And I think the core stars at Brentford might well stay until such point where somebody comes in for a manager like Thomas Frank, who inevitably, if Ange Postecoglou leaves, will be linked with Spurs. I think they'd be more inclined to be looking at a name like Andoni Iraola. But once again, we're only talking about succession planning, which all well-run clubs do. We're not necessarily saying they're out there drawing up a shortlist. But anyway, right now, I think if Frank stays at Brentford, it's mid-season. They've got no time to replace him. They've already turned down, as you say, a bid from Nottingham Forest. It's not that the Spurs' interest isn't there, nor is it to say it won't be picked up again in the summer. But I think it highly, highly unlikely that Brentford will sell. And when Thomas Frank said that there was no chance, and good luck to Nottingham Forest if they bid again, and he said the same about Bryan and Mbeumo as well. These were on-record comments. And because they were us on TalkSport, I've listened to those interviews and I know the context around them. And I just get the sense that this is not posturing like some of the comments around Ivan Toney before he went to Al Ahly. I think this is the Brentford board empowering Thomas Frank to say, your stars are your stars, at least until the summer. And Brentford should be in for a relatively stable second half of the season as a result. They have no time to replace either of them if they went either. So only crazy, crazy money, which is very un-Daniel Levy-like in the final hours of the window, is going to change either Mbeumo or Wissa's situations in the next few days.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, we've very kind of Ben gave us a bit of an overview there in regards to where we are in terms of those forwards that have been mentioned in those kind of last 24, 48 hours. Again, Mathys Tel, Yoane Wissa in there. And as obviously we referred to Noah Okafor. Now, it's interesting because obviously at the moment, Vincent Kompany is coming out of his presser following Bayern's game in the Champions League. I mean, for those that have missed that, you can see Tel looking like he's waving goodbye to the Bayern fans, it appears, which it does appear to insinuate that he is going to be on the move. And Vincent Kompany's actually been asked to comment with regards to the situation. He's actually just said, I've nothing to say about that at the moment. Mathys is our player. We're in close contact with him and his agents. Christoph or Max can say more about what happens in the next few hours or days. We understand also Mathys Tel was caught in the mix zone in whether he was actually asked that question if he's played his last game for Bayern Munich. His response, I don't know. I mean, I think just to finish on this point on Tel for now, Ben, unless we get any further updates on it, how much of a coup would that be for Tottenham if they were to get Tel over the line, whether that be on a loan with an obligation or just on a loan option itself? Would that be seen as a massive coup given Tottenham's failure so far in this window to get a striker, and obviously the noise around the fact they couldn't get Yoane over the line? Because I think many would maybe fill out there Tel, for the kind of profile he is, for the fact of his position as well, could actually benefit Tottenham more than, dare I say, Callum Yoane. I'm sure he's not a bad player, but I think if you ask a lot of Tottenham fans, they actually might prefer Tel's profile, unless I might be getting that completely wrong. Fans obviously have different opinions.
Yeah, I think Tel would be a massive coup because it's like a foot race at the moment between several clubs from the Premier League and all across Europe. So you know when it's that type of position and that type of age and that type of potential, that if you land Tel, you're ticking two boxes, one for the now and one for the future. And you're likely beating off Chelsea, who have got a bit of leverage because Christopher Nkunku wants to go to Bayern Munich, Manchester United, and no doubt several other clubs that are all either Champions League or regular European sides. So if Tel chooses Spurs, it's either going to be because he buys into the style, he buys into the manager, or he just thinks that the club, its location, its culture, its pathway for him are all right. Because he's obviously not joining Spurs with any guarantee now of European football next season. It's a little bit of a carrot on a stick to sort of say, come in, win a couple of games and you get a trophy, because they're that close, obviously, to potentially being finalists and going on to win the League Cup. But that's probably not going to make that much of a difference in this kind of negotiation. So I think it's about how can Spurs now work collectively as an executive and football team to go out there and pitch? Because you would say that on the football side, it's relatively simple. The formation suits Tel. He would get regular minutes. It's an attack-minded system. He'd get a fair amount of freedom, and he would be able to go one-on-one and know that the rest of the team will all adapt. So if he beats the one-on-one, you got lots of people committing numbers. If he loses the one-on-one, you got lots of versatile players that can cover him, which means that he can dine off his kind of successes with the ball and the failures can be a bit more mitigated. And I think all of that on the football side is quite a strong pitch. I think at Manchester United, he's going to say, I'm coming in, but who's leaving to create the space for me to play? At Chelsea, he's saying, you've got a massive squad. There's heavy competition in my place. There's probably more players coming in the summer. And therefore, Tottenham may be in a position out of the Premier League clubs where they can give him the clearest and most definitive role within the first team. But then is there that Ange Postecoglou, Daniel Levy, Scott Munn, all going out of their way to pitch the rest of it? The what if next season we don't have European football? The what if this season we get sucked into a relegation battle? Who's going to go out there and sort of convince him that despite the role in the team, this is the right environment, this is the right culture, this is the right ambition, other resources are going to come? Because I think if he joins, it will be a loan plus something. And that plus something implies a very long tenure at Tottenham. And I think the last thing that he will want is to commit to something and then find that the project doesn't live up to the pitch. And that's the big problem over time with Tottenham constantly. There was the summer with Antonio Conte where they made lots of signings, but they were all kind of peripheral or depth at large. There was the Harry Kane departure, and the money wasn't really spent on a replacement immediately. Then Dom Solanke comes in and you start to think, okay, now we're building a spine. Then they buy Young. Brilliant coup to get Bergvall ahead of Barcelona. Archie Gray, by the way, is going to be a world-class player. I don't care where he plays, right back, centre back, central midfield. He's going to be incredible. Mikey Moore's got a big potential, but clearly has a steep learning curve at the moment if he's thrown in at the deep end. So Tel's going to be thinking, okay, where are the leaders? Where is the unity? What is the culture? And if he buys into all of that, he'll get the minutes in the short term. So I think the challenge Spurs are going to have is pitching the longer term project. But right now, in the short term, between now and summer, I think they're in a relatively strong position to guarantee Tel the minutes he's looking for, compared at least to Manchester United or Chelsea.
And I just want to make a point there as well, because I see a few people in the chat talking about reports that Tel has chosen Man United or would prefer a move to Man United, that it's important for some fans to remember as well that that's one box ticked of 3. You still need Bayern Munich to accept any offer that Man United might put in there. You know, as you're speaking about the formula of any deal there, Ben. And also Man United need to be able to bring him in. There's talk that they might need to get rid of Garnacho or Rashford before they can make a signing. And with Ratcliffe removing a reward for stewards, a £50 a week reward for the steward of the week, I think adding a star player like Tel to his wage bill without something going the other way seems a little bit unrealistic. But look, of course, in the transfer window, anything can happen. I do want to just put a few more names in front of you, Ben, to see if there's anything to these stories, the links to Tottenham. We have Liam Delap, Marcus Rashford, Breland Bolo, Evan Gesand. Is there anything you might see Spurs potentially going for late in this window on those?
I'd be surprised on Rashford. The feeling is he wants Barcelona. There was a new bid from Al Ahly today. Rashford said, no, I still don't want to go to Saudi Arabia. So it feels like staying at Manchester United is actually a very realistic possibility, and going to Barcelona, if they can find a way financially to make that deal work, could come off, but it might go right down towards the end of the window. I'm not aware that Manchester United would be that happy about loaning Rashford to a Premier League rival, and 2, I think Rashford perhaps feels if he's going to leave Old Trafford, it might be better to go to Europe. So I don't think that one necessarily has much legs. The name of those that you've mentioned that I would touch upon is Liam Delap. And I think that if, for example, Tel came on the left side, there's still room to add a number 9 as well. And that's where they had looked at Evan Ferguson, but Brighton only want a loan. And I think when everyone's fit, you can't guarantee Ferguson is playing in the same way that you can guarantee Tel is playing. But Delap's a different kind of category, because the form he's in at the moment, the high ceiling that he's got, that will be a transfer I expect, whether Ipswich stay up or go down, to happen. And the only real difference is if they go down, the price, of course, will be a little bit lower. So I would term Chelsea front runners for Liam Delap. I think they're very intent on him, along with Benjamin Sesko. My feeling is Arsenal are in pole position for Sesko. And then obviously the knock-on effect would be that Chelsea may be more inclined to go for Delap. Chelsea might even say right now, and it's very early, I know, they rank Delap above Sesko in their list of possibilities. But I think Tottenham will be in that conversation for Liam Delap as well. I think the player's quite keen on moving to a London club. I don't think, because he's playing at Ipswich at the moment, he minds about the now. So again, it's about where's the best development, where's the best package, where's the best training facilities, where's the best manager. It's not about who's got Champions League football right now. So if Spurs didn't get Europe, I don't think it would put them at a significant disadvantage compared to, say, Chelsea. It would be more about who can convince the player he's going to play regularly and thrive under a manager and in that system. So the only downside for Tottenham in anything summer is, again, coming back to the conversation we had about Ange Postecoglou, that if you don't know categorically who your manager's going to be in the summer, and Chelsea are saying, regardless of if we get top 4, top 5 or don't, we're backing Enzo Maresca for the long run, then that manager can start pitching to players, and they have the confidence that if they arrive, not much is going to change. Whereas right now, if you're dealing like Delap and Summer and you're starting to plan, I think the first question everyone's going to ask is, what happens if you don't get European football? What happens if you finish in the bottom half of the table? What happens if you don't win the League Cup? What happens if you change the manager? How will that affect everything? And where I think Tottenham have been weak, and it may be there's mitigating circumstances, and there was the sort of relatively unplanned departure regarding Paratici, but to go from Conte ball into Ange ball, there's no real synergy there. And therefore, everyone Ange inherited, if they were a Conte player, Højbjerg's a good example, some of the defenders, you got to change your entire game. So when you're looking for synergy in any way, shape or form, you don't get that continuity. And again, if Tottenham are going to go and get another manager that's different to Ange after this, then any player's going to be thinking, how do I know if I commit to this project? The manager, the system, the style, everything, it's just going to keep changing. So this is why recruitment teams try these days in modern football to take power away from managers. Because if you give too much control and say and veto, like in the case of Ten Hag, then everything that you bring, if the manager goes, can be odd fits in whatever your new manager and new system is. So looking back now, and I know hindsight's a wonderful thing, that lack of continuity in Tottenham's football projects, particularly from Conte to Ange, feels like this summer they have to be very clear. They're either going to keep Ange and back him definitively. So anyone coming in feels like it's another season, 25-26. Or if they're going to get rid of him, they have to be decisive very early so as not to overshadow their window. And whoever they hire has to be very similar to Ange Postecoglou in style, in intensity. Otherwise, without that continuity, a player like Delap's probably going to turn around and go, I'll go to the most stable club on offer. And that's not Spurs, unless we can get clarity over the long-term future of the project and its personnel sooner rather than later.
I think, Ben, what we would say is on that point when you mentioned about Ange Postecoglou there, I think whilst many would like Spurs to stick to definitely an attacking brand of football, which would fit the ethos of the football club, I think there might be some that would slightly maybe feel that there could be a little bit of balance when it comes to the attacking and defending and just having a bit of a, what's the right word I'm looking for? A bit of adaptability, a bit of flexibility with that. I mean, I think that's absolutely fair. Ben, I promise you I'll get you out of here by 1:30. We're hitting 1:30. Can we have you for 10, 15 minutes more? Is that okay with yourself?
We'll go into extra time. It's all my fault. I mean, I'm the one that's talking.
Listen, when do we not go into extra time with Ben Jacobs? And we just had to get Ben, we had to just get Matt off the sideline to bring him back in to full focus there. We nearly lost Matt. He's only back for one night only. We nearly broke him already. Listen, we're going to go for our belated final break of the show for our listeners on audio. We have got over 15,000 of you that are watching the show live. As always, thank you so much for all your incredible support for this multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, Last One on Spurs, which I have the joy to host. Alongside me back for one night only is the superb Matty Hayes, and we're joined by the brilliant broadcaster, journalist, presenter, one of the busiest men you'll see on the planet in these respective transfer windows. It's the wonderful Ben Jacobs, who's blessed us with his time. And like I say, we always love having Ben on this show. It is, I've got to always say, for me, in education, you learn so much more than just what targets Tottenham are after. I've got to say, Ben, I know people are blown away whenever you come on the show, so we can't thank you enough for your time. As we do run in to extra time, I will get straight to the point. In terms of defenders, we mentioned that might be an area Tottenham may look at in these final days of the transfer window. I think we mentioned to you actually when you were last on, there has been links to the likes of Thomas Christensen. There's also Itakura that's been mentioned. I think since we last spoken, of course, Milan Skriniar is now off the table. Is there anyone out there you think defender-wise we should keep our eye on these final days of the window? Or will it quite literally be a mad trolley dash shop? What's going to happen in these next 48, 72 hours and more to come?
Yeah, I mean, they've certainly done their due diligence. I think if they bring somebody in, they would be looking ideally for Premier League experience or an older kind of player in Europe that would be much more short-term. The kind of Clement Longley style loan, I suppose, would be one formula they might explore. I mentioned on the last show Milan Skriniar, and I think that was widely reported, but he's gone to Fenerbahce. Tottenham had considered that opportunity. Kevin Danso, as I've discussed before, the price is just too high. Not impossible, but I feel like it's Wolves really pushing on that deal at the moment rather than Tottenham. I know internally they discussed Lloyd Kelly and Newcastle had kind of battered it off. And then there was some interest from Italy in him. So it's difficult because there's not actually that many centre-backs that are going to be available in the last few days of the window, and certainly not the kind that fit Spurs' profile. So right now, I would be surprised if you're talking as a fan pleasantly so if another centre-back came in, but I think I'd be banking more on the efforts and the energy on the forward. And then if a centre-back comes in, it will be something that is very opportunistic as we get a merry-go-round in the final few days of the window. But I'm not aware of a centre-back at this stage being particularly advanced.
Ben, I want to ask you about a couple of names that we actually got concrete names that Tottenham's are interested in a couple of days ago. Reports suggest that Spurs want to sign Tyler Dibling and Angel Gomes this summer. Now, on the Dibling front, Spurs would ideally like to sign him in January, but if that proves beyond them, the club are also discussing trying to get an agreement in place for him to move permanently at the end of the season. And in the case of Gomes, he's a player that Spurs have held talks over as they attempt to set up deals ahead of the summer window, with Gomez's contract expiring at the end of the season. So that could potentially be a free transfer. Do you have any information on either of those players potentially coming to Tottenham?
Yeah, both of them very high on the list of Tottenham's thinking. And I think summer is more likely. Gomes, like you say, free agent in the summer. So I'm not expecting any movement now. And that one's really a no-brainer, isn't it? If you can find an economical name who has been fantastic in 5 impressive years in France and you can bring him over, then that is the kind of Daniel Levy deal at the right price, the right profile. He's only, 24 years of age. And I think the player's quite keen as well to move back to England. He obviously had 3 years, I think it was, at Manchester United before going to Lille. And my understanding is he feels the best opportunity that he'll have of putting himself in contention for Thomas Tuchel's England at the 2026 World Cup is joining a Premier League team. So I think there's a realistic possibility that Spurs move for that in the summer, but I'm not so sure there's anything that can be done now in the final few days of the window. Dibling's an interesting one because if you're brutally honest against Southampton, we know they're going to go down. So this is probably the window when someone urgently needs a player like Dibling, where they can get their highest possible value. But I still think that they would rather, for his development, and just in case somehow they can catch up with the teams around them, and it will be a low points total to stay up to, but there's obviously a big gulf. I think they feel like he might be the spark and the difference. The other thing as well with Dibling is even though we've seen some reports out there that 55, 60 million will be good enough in January, that's not really the messages that I'm getting from Southampton. It's much more not for sale, crazy money. And when put to them is crazy money, 55, 60 million, I think they think it's even higher than that. So it will be a relatively difficult deal to get done now. I'm not aware of any bids. And the other thing to understand about Tyler Dibling is that he's a really shy kid who will be looking to leave Southampton, not just because of the relegation, but he was very tied to and loyal to Russell Martin. And now Ivan Juric has come in. Of course, he has a perfectly fine relationship with the manager, but it's a new era. And Johannes Spors is coming in as technical director. So there's not as much pre-existing as there has been in years gone by. But Dibling kind of still in a football sense and as a personality needs to come out of his shell a little bit, which shows you how big a talent he can be because he's already explosive and raw and the game just looks second nature to him. And the Spurs interest, again, is very legitimate here. But when he left Southampton the first time, he went to Chelsea, got lost in the Cobham system. He found it very overwhelming. He didn't like being away from his family and it was a pressure cooker. So winning the race for Dibling is very heavily focused, not just on a football pitch, but on a kind of family one as well. And this is where Leipzig are ones to watch because they're sort of saying, we're the experts in developing young talent. We'll buy you, develop you. And you know, if the right opportunity comes, our model will also allow us to sell you as well. And more players of that Dibling generation are looking at the sort of Jude Bellingham type path. Go abroad, become a star, and then the world is your oyster. And I think Dibling is not averse like he was perhaps 4 or 5 years ago in his formative years to going abroad, knowing that unlike Cobham, a move to Leipzig would not be a pressure cooker. And then you have Spurs, and again, the facilities, the manner in which they can integrate him and give him very tailored coaching and development. That's going to be important. A hands-on coaching staff, a manager that understands they have to adapt to what the player needs.
Watch those hamstrings. Watch those hamstrings, Ben. Watch those hamstrings.
And yeah, keep him fit, keep him happy, keep him
Absolutely.
integrated. And I just think there's a situation where the Dibling family, even if an offer is placed and accepted, may put a roadblock on a move this fast and this late in the window. But I do think Spurs will be there. I think depending on what happens with Aston Villa in the next few days, because they might go for Joao Felix. Obviously, Duran is going to Al Nassr, but Dibling was on their radar. And then you have Newcastle, who really wanted him when Dan Ashworth was there. And then Ashworth went to Man U, mentioned him again. Jason Wilcox is still at Man U. So Man United and Newcastle are very aware of Dibling as well. I think Newcastle is more likely than Manchester United. But I think that right now, you would say Gomes and Dibling are concrete Spurs targets, almost certainly for the summer rather than now.
Ben, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. We really do appreciate on those two names. There you go. That's the latest on Dibling and Gomes. Just to go back to Tel for 1 second, we've had a slight update from Bayern Munich director Max Elber, who says Mathys Tel wants to leave, so we will assess all the options and decide what to do. I can understand him. That's coming directly from Bayern Munich director Max Erbel. I mean, we reported by Fabrizio Romano. So we'll keep you posted if anything further that happens with regards to Mathys Tel during this show. As Ben has already stated, he is understood to be Spurs' top target as things stand during this transfer window. I will again mention a point at the time of recording that is the case. Obviously, that situation can change at any moment, any second. And I will remind you, it is Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. We are 29 days into the transfer window, and we're yet to even sign an outfield player. So I stress that even more. At the moment, he's Tottenham's top transfer target. That could very much change when our listeners on audio get this through their ears first thing on that commute in the morning. I am going to quickly, if I can, on that point, just get from you, Ben, what you understand to be the latest on some of the players that are at the football club, because the last time we did touch base, we discussed Heung-Min Son's future, and actually you revealed on the show there was some interest in, I believe, Germany for the player, namely Frankfurt, that were keen on signing Sonny. Only a couple of days later, we saw Spurs exercise that option, which they've got the full right to. We understand Son had no control over that trigger option to extend him for a further 12 months. There were reports, Ben, out there that Son was maybe a little disappointed the club didn't sit down and negotiate a more longer term, obviously fresher deal, because as we understand these trigger options to work, and look, you'll know a bit more better than us, that I think it just is a case of they're triggering the existing contract, therefore salary remains the same. There's no actual changing of the conditions of the contract, where you might argue with Son, who might be looking for a longer term deal now for more security, might have liked a bit of a bunce up in terms of his pay, even though it's fair to say there has been a real alarming drop off from the player, certainly this season, when you compare it to previous seasons, Ben.
Yeah, and you have to look at age as well in Tottenham's consideration. I have to say that ever since we pretty much got to the summer, I was never aware, and have great respect for anybody else's reporting, but I was never personally aware of talks with Son over a new deal. It was always, we're going to trigger the 1 year. And when we spoke on the last show, you may remember how surprised I was that it hadn't been done. So it was ironic that a few days later, they finally did it. Because I was told in July, August, September, October, and November, we're triggering it, we're triggering it, we're triggering it. And triggering is always very interesting, because when you do it, it doesn't necessarily mean you're committing to that year. It can mean that you're just protecting yourself with an open window against the player going out and pre-agreeing a contract. And it can mean that you're protecting a little bit of value as well, especially when you look at Saudi going after players maybe only with a year left on their contract and offering crazy money. So it suits Spurs to trigger it. But now the key thing is, what kind of role and impact is Son going to have in the next kind of 18 months or so? And as I said, and you've just alluded to, there is some interest from Germany. There's a few MLS clubs that like the idea of maybe signing him in January 2026. So that will be the litmus test for me, because I don't think anything's going to happen with Son in terms of an exit this summer. But if the role is diminished, and if they add in his position, do you get mid-season and say he's going to leave on a free transfer anyway? And then, of course, in the same year as the World Cup, you may have MLS clubs that like the idea. Saudi are still there. Son's just never opened the door. But But Al Ahly, for example, are one of the clubs, and Al Qadsiya another, who have both pretty much over the last 3 windows, via central deal makers, expressed an interest and said, can we get Son? And at the moment, Saudi are looking at players in different regions. So John Duran, Colombia, maybe Mo Salah, Egypt, somebody like Son. And then you're covering all the markets. So suddenly, if Son joins Saudi or even arguably MLS, South Korean market, you wrap it up, you do a deal. And this is what both MLS and Saudi's model is moving towards. But particularly Saudi, it's saying, we're not just about spending, we're about revenue. So keep an eye on Saudi, because the players that they sign are going to be very strategic, and not just football fits, but league fits that help them globalize, that help them bring in sponsors, that help them bring in new audiences, that help them attract new markets. And right now, the international television rights in Saudi and the domestic rights are all up for renewal in the summer. And you're probably going to see lots of different regions isolated and split and sold separately rather than grouped together. And the ones that are the most marketable will basically be with countries that are following particular players. So Son and Saudi might develop, but it would require the player to spectacularly change his mind, because Son has said for the last 3 windows he's got no interest in going to Saudi Arabia. But I think the beauty of Son is that whether he's playing or not, he's an incredibly positive influence at the football club, and they know that. And this is partially why I think they were glad to extend, because keeping him for a season where the football role could become diminished is not going to in any way overshadow the benefit that you have by Son just being at the football club and on the training ground. And who knows, maybe club captain, even when he's not playing, if someone else has got the armband. So I don't think it's quite the beginning of the end for Son and Spurs yet. But I do think it was never their intent to offer him a long-term deal, which is an appreciation that by the end of the 25-26 season, he may end up moving elsewhere, which is normal when you consider his age and who else might come into the football club.
From captain to vice captain, Ben, and Cristian Romero is reportedly set to be a target for Spanish clubs next summer and is believed to be open to leaving Tottenham at the end of the season. Is this something you feel is a possibility? And are you surprised that we've heard nothing on contract talks with him as he moves into the last 18 months of his deal?
I think it's very rare, even when a player's injured. I've never quite understood this, by the way, because my logic, it was the same with Mason Mount at Chelsea, is if the player's injured, what better time to speak to them? Because their only focus really, if they've come out of an operation or they're in rehabilitation, is on the future. So why not back your injured player and say, whilst you're injured, let's tie you down for the foreseeable future? But for whatever reason, it's not really the done thing when players are in rehabilitation. Maybe because if the injury is serious, they're waiting to find out how the player recovers. And then when you're in an open window, aside from Liverpool, they have to do it with Trent Alexander-Arnold and arguably Salah and Van Dijk. You try not to have these conversations in an open window because everybody's busy with other things. So there's a reason why nothing has progressed yet with Alexander Isak and Newcastle. But as we get towards the back end of the season, those conversations over a potential renewal may start. So I think Tottenham are relatively confident with Romero. It's true the player might be open to one move in particular, and that's Real Madrid. It's the same with Pedro Porro as well, who is somewhat on the list of Real possibilities, along with Diego Dallo, if they don't get Trent Alexander-Arnold. But Spurs' position, I've always got the impression, certainly over the summer, was that Romero's untouchable. And right now, whether he signs a new contract or not, they've got no intent to sell, regardless of what the player wants. Going forwards, the litmus test will be, as the contract runs down a little bit, if he shows no inclination to sign a new deal, at that point you start to have to think, we better sell now to get the highest possible value. But we're not there yet. You don't have a player that's unhappy at Tottenham. You just have a lot of suitors that are aware of his talent and that there may be a future market opportunity. So I think unless it's Real Madrid, Tottenham will feel quite confident about the situation. They've got no intent to sell in the imminent future. And it may be possible they start contract talks with Cristian Romero. We've seen some reports, I think, that that's already been initiated. That's not quite my understanding at this stage. I'm not aware of any formal renewal talks yet, but let's wait and see what happens when the window shuts, because it wouldn't surprise me if we get into the Easter period, if we do get wind of a new deal on the table for Romero.
Just as we move into added time and extra time here, Ben, you've taken us further than Tamworth. I want to speak about Yang Min-Hyuk.
Not that reminder.
That was a great
I don't know why I
line,
brought
mate.
that up. Sorry, guys. Yang Min-Hyuk today joined QPR on loan for the remainder of the season. He joined us earlier this month from Gangwon following the conclusion of their season, and will now continue his development at Loftus Road. He's represented South Korea at under 16 and under 17 level and was named the K-League's Young Player of the Year in 2024. First of all, your thoughts on that move, and also if you can see any other Spurs players leaving the club before the end of the window.
I mean, the last thing they need is too many outgoings before they can bring in players. So I think they'll try and keep the depth. Much of what we spoke about at the beginning of the window were players that could have left, and even dating back to kind of the end of the summer. But now they're suddenly finding themselves getting minutes. So Leeds United like Ben Davies, but they're obviously not going to sanction that now. You have a fair few suitors that are alert to the Richarlison situation. I just don't see that happening in January. And the biggest interest had come from Saudi and Al Ahly over the summer. Newcastle have made an inquiry, but they value him at 40 million or maybe even slightly under. And Tottenham is still insisting if we're going to sell, it's a 60 million kind of outlay. So it would be a huge shock if we see a twist with Richarlison, with Dom Solanke out and no striker coming in. But maybe the summer there, and Al Ahly, like I say, in Saudi Arabia were the main club trying for Richarlison. But now, of course, they've got Ivan Toney. So it shows you how quickly opportunities kind of come and go. And then Jed Spence, we know that Genoa over the summer were trying to sign him for about 3 million euros. The option to buy, I think, was between 7 and 8 million euros. That was too high for Genoa. It didn't come off. And he's ended up getting game time as well. So I don't think we'll get that many outgoings. Regarding Yang, I really like him. He can play on the left and the right. Yep. Looks like he's adept with both feet. There are some similarities to Son, but it's a bit of a glib comparison in my view, because I think in many ways, and this might sound strange because Son's numbers are not bad, but I would back over time Yang to be more prolific. I think he's a natural finisher. He's lightning quick as well. I'm sure if you line up all the Spurs players and do like a bleep test or whatever they do these days to find out who's the fittest and who's the fastest, I think you'd probably find that Yang was very close to the quickest player at the football club and maybe with the most stamina as well. So I love his directness. It'll be interesting to see how he fares at QPR in the Championship, and whether that sort of physicality and sometimes no-nonsense defenders stifle his game a little bit. But when you're kind of playing on the counter-attack, or when you've got space, and when you're dominating possession with a player like Yang, you'll really again notice his directness, his willingness to run at defenders, his willingness to switch sides, his willingness to cut inside, his finishing. It's very train-like almost. I think of sort of Adama, who, you know, is a completely different kind of player because he's actually built like the Hulk. But every time I see Adama play, and I know it's a slightly strange comparison, he just sort of drives in like a very obvious way. So obvious, you know what he's going to do, but you can't stop it. And that's the thing about Yang. He's completely different to Adama. But when he starts a run, you'll be like, I know what he's going to do. I can see this coming. I can understand he's about to create space. So there's always this like bum on the edge of the seat anticipation, completely different to Adama, but similar in the sense that you're not ever that like surprised by what he does. You're just wowed by the execution of it, in the manner in which he skips past players, in the manner in which he changes direction, in the manner in which he moves off the ball, in the manner in which he goes from fast to slow and to fast again. And that wrong foots defenders and makes them look very silly at times, and it's effortless. So this is why I think he's a big talent, because all of that, perhaps unlike Adama, does come, in my opinion, with an end product. And I hope we see that at QPR, but I can guarantee you, whether it's next season or in a few years, Yang is going to be a player that has a lot of goal contributions for Spurs.
Ben, thank you so much. Look, it's been an incredible show. We're at the final two questions, which are more of a light-hearted nature, right? As you know, we always end on light-hearted questions as we look to close here. There's over 16,000 of you that are watching this show live. Can I say again, amazing support for the show, amazing support for Ben. I know people absolutely love seeing Ben Jacobs on Last Word on Spurs. And I will again implore you, keep hitting the subscribe, but hitting the like button. It helps the algorithms to push us out to a much wider footballing audience that get to hear Ben's views. Because the great thing when Ben comes on here is, I don't think even Ben knows he's doing this. He ends up updating you on half the other clubs, along with Tottenham, which is phenomenal. I think which is brilliant. He comes on here for a Last Word on Spurs podcast, and then Benny say, God, we got updates on Ben on our own club, and we're only coming in for the Tottenham news, which is great. For those other clubs out there, I've got to say, for us Tottenham fans, we're always in love with Ben. And Ben, simple one I'm going to ask you. We're going to be blessed to probably have you back with us in the summer here. An easy one to ask you on this point. For you to be sitting here discussing Ange Postecoglou as the Tottenham head coach in the summer, what has he got to do between now and the end of the season to be the Tottenham manager, for you to be sitting with us here in the summer to make that a possibility? We are in all three cup competitions. We're 15th in the Premier League. What's going to be the case for you to be sitting here discussing him as the Tottenham head coach in 6 months' time?
I think he has to win something in his second season, like he promised. That's the kind of short answer. And if he doesn't, then he has to find some kind of top six form between the next league game against Brentford and the end of the season. Because anything other than top six form, and they're going to probably finish in the bottom half of the table. And I think come the end of the season, that won't be good enough. So it feels like a pivotal February, because you've got to respond from Leicester. You've got a home game first in the Europa League, so not much travel. Brentford's a London game as well. Back-to-back wins there. Then there's momentum to take to Anfield in a game, despite having a 1-0 lead, that I don't think Spurs are the favourites for. And I'm not sure if Liverpool win that game and Spurs go out of the League Cup, it will be as damning if they beat Elfsborg and Brentford, providing they don't collapse, providing they don't do what they've done against certain teams this season, get a lead, get a 2-0 aggregate, and then blow it. If Liverpool just play them off the park and they're in phenomenal form, and Spurs put in a great performance, but they lose by a goal on aggregate, I don't think that will be the be-all and the end-all, especially with the opportunity to instantly respond and maybe progress to the fifth round of the FA Cup against Aston Villa. But when you look at the microcosm of the season, it's there in the next 4 games: Europa League, Premier League, League Cup semi-final, FA Cup. And I think heading into Man United and a really difficult run, away at Ipswich isn't easy, Man City, Bournemouth are in great form, so are Fulham, a derby away at Chelsea. The whole season, if they don't build momentum in these next 4 games, could really get away from Ange Postecoglou. And at that point, mid-table mediocrity or worse. And it's very hard to see how he'll be in a job at the end of the season come this sort of summer review. So I'm not saying there's one game in the next 4, but I certainly don't think that he can afford to lose a Premier League game and go out the cup. Not to say he'd be sacked immediately afterwards, but it may feel a bit like the beginning of the end, because these are not easy fixtures once you get into late February. And by the time you get into April and you think, okay, I think they've got Southampton, they've got Wolves, they've got Forest, who knows whether there'll be a bit of burnout there. They've got Palace, they've got home game, might be against Brighton, maybe last game of the season. By the time they get there, you're in mid-April. If you're 15th in the table, it doesn't matter what they do in those games. If they're out of cup, if they haven't won anything and they're 15th the table, game over. So I think it is the next 4 games. I'm not saying in the next 4 games he'll be sacked definitively, because I think that's sensationalism. And I'm not aware that he's on any kind of game-by-game basis. They're trying to back him, internal pressure, everything we said right at the beginning. But I think 4 games, 1 in each kind of competition they're fighting on, can they get to a point where everyone thinks, this is just typical Spurs, isn't it? We're going to go and somehow win the Europa League, win the League Cup, win the FA Cup, and finish 16th in the Premier League. And it's that kind of season, isn't it? Where who knows, they might win a trophy or 2. And you guys will know better than me, but you would surely take perhaps not only a League Cup and 16th in the Premier League, but you'd surely take 2 trophies and a 16th place finish over, at best, 7th Europa Conference League and no trophies.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is, as Kaylee says here, is there a chance Spurs win the Europa League but get relegated in the Premier League? The crazy thing is on that, if Spurs do win the Europa League, they go straight into the Champions League, which seems crazy when we've been sitting here about the squad bemoaning the fact we're the 29th day of the transfer window, 30 for listeners and audio, we're still yet to sign an outfield player. We're all going absolutely crazy, and yet Tottenham could be in the Champions League next season. I can't even have that in my
There was
kind of
a
thought process.
season, I only remember it as a Leicester fan. There was a season when Leicester had Martin O'Neill in the 90s. Some of the slightly older 30 and 40-year-olds in the chat may remember it. And Middlesbrough had Fabrizio Ravanelli, and they got to the League Cup final against my Leicester, and we won. A replay, by the way, at Hillsborough, which sounds ridiculous that it wouldn't be decided on the day or it wouldn't be back at Wembley, but it was like, well, Hillsborough's halfway between Middlesbrough and Leicester. They lost an FA Cup final and they got relegated in the same season. So Spurs have got those kind of vibes. I'm not saying they're going to go down and not win any trophies, but it's just got those vibes of like, they're probably going to get to the business end of knockout competition and they're probably going to finish mid-table. That would be my prediction.
Ben, there's a lot of people that will implore to agree with you on that point. I've got to say, let's hand over to Matt, who gets the final word on Last Word on Spurs. Matty, over to you as a one night only.
I've missed asking this question, and it's I think it's tougher than ever, Ben, with the way Tottenham's window has gone. But between now and the window closing on the 3rd of February, how many players do you personally see Spurs getting over the line?
I'm just going to say one. I think I'll be gladly proven wrong if it's 2. It's clearly not going to be 3. It would be a disaster if it's 0. So 1 attacker and then bonus signing is if they can find an opportunistic defender. But I'm going to be realistic and I'm going to predict 1.
Ben, we love you very, very much. You always find the topics here on Last Word on Spurs. As we hit deadline, we haven't hit deadline. We've hit midnight here on Last Word on Spurs. Ben, there is over 16,000 adoring football fans out here, predominantly mostly Tottenham, but they're here for any club that you give information on. Where can the football community find the wonderful work you do? And again, a personal thanks from us to you of the amount of time you've given to Last Word on Spurs. I know, again, many do love having you on the show. It's an education for many. For those that are kind of learning more about the football club, you give them so much information on that. Where can people find the wonderful work you do in the most craziest time of your year?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. And I always enjoy coming on the show. And I think a lot of people that listen will not know the work that you and the team put into producing these shows. So I really always do enjoy coming on, talking about Tottenham, and all the awards that you win for this podcast are very deserved. And as a consequence, the best place that you can find me and my work is on a podcast like this. And it will be a pleasure to come on again at some point later in the year. So keep up the good work is the first thing to say. And if there's a table for podcasts, then Spurs are a lot healthier in terms of Last Word on Spurs being top or in a Champions League place, whereas the actual football team, unfortunately, are not matching what you do on here. But yeah, aside from that, TalkSport, 6:30 tomorrow morning. I'll be doing my breakfast hit and covering deadline day for them. Gimme Sport for my writing, and at Jacobs Ben on X.
Ben, you're a superstar. We're going to literally put you to bed now because he's up in 5.5 hours and this man doesn't sleep. I can tell you he's probably even now after the show still doing more, given the nature of what this man is capable of. I want to say a massive thank you to the wonderful Matty Hayes. I'm sure, Matt, you'll employ your love for Ben. Before you do, can I just say what a lovely opportunity to have Matt alongside me. One night only. Like I say, Matt, we love you. We miss you very, very much. Thanks for going back to this one, but I'm sure you agree. If it wasn't Ben, you wouldn't be here. And I know how much you love me, but it's Ben, right? You've come back for Ben, and I don't mind you saying that.
I've great time for you, Ricky, and I really enjoy your company. But like you said, the education that you get with Ben, before the show, I was scripting some videos that I need to do on transfers for work in the morning. I've been taking notes as Ben has been speaking away so it'll be a little bit better tomorrow than they have been in the last few days. But it's been lovely to come back on, and I'm glad because you messaged me last night, Ricky, when there was absolutely no transfer news to talk about, and we got so many links today. So it was actually some positivity and some hope within the show today, and of course with the brilliant guests. So it's been great to be back, and thank you so much for having me.
Bless you, Matty. Thank you so much. We'll be keeping in touch. And listen, Matt's in the Spurs community. You're going to see him here and everywhere still with what's going on. Matty, thank you so much to the wonderful, brilliant Ben Jacobs, giving us a comprehensive analysis of where Spurs are in this transfer window. A reminder, things can change any hour, any minute, any second. We'll give you as to where we are right now. But that is obviously the nature of things changing. I want to say a massive thank you to the wonderful presenter, broadcaster, journalist, the brilliant Ben Jacobs. We have been the last one on Spurs. Please keep safe, keep well. And as always, come on, you Spurs.